I'm back. I'm gonna burn up the batteries in my laptop and my phone to... What? Try to download... Hey, Eric. Try to download Fast Food Simulator. I'm also trying to download Kingdoms and Castles, Peglin, and Against the Storm, and I don't know when I'm going to have time to get good at any of these games, but they're all games I've decided I want to play. And there's one of you, his name is Mr. S. He likes video games, and he likes to see people do things they enjoy. And there's another of you, Eric Widman, who just likes my company. And then there's a third of you, Rach, who just likes me. So, yeah, the fast food simulator is gonna happen. I worked in that industry for a really long time. I worked in that industry for a really long time. And it's basically the wholesome version of Schedule 1, so it just seems thematically appropriate. You're going to be the only one here, Eric, but I will give it a moment for people who want to participate in Spoopyween. These fucking assholes, man. Eric, can I just, dish with you for a second? These fucking assholes were like, you should do something special for Halloween. We'll totally be there. We'll be in the comments and we'll watch all the videos. And as soon as I started, they found somewhere else to be. And they think I'm not going to call them out for it. It's like, oh, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. Does it? Oh, we're not going to watch. We just wanted to fuck your life. Whatever, man. Thank you for being here. That's all I'm trying to say. Yeah, they're trying to ride that algorithm. Hey, Casey. You are obviously not who I'm talking about. First of all, you don't give me suggestions on what material I should make. Yes, John Keel is my favorite author. It's one of my favorite people. Life is all about choices, informs us, Warren. From John Keel, Disneyland of the Gods, chapter Where Did the Earth Come From? Which is thematically appropriate to my Patreon post today. I agree, Eric, and that's what I'm doing. I'm doing what I love. And somehow that has chased away a bunch of people. Whatever. From John Keel. The popular scientific explanation for the creation of the Earth is a lot of rubbish. The sun is an atomic bomb composed of hydrogen atoms constantly ripping apart and turning into helium. A chunk of the sun is not likely to cool and solidify. It would convert to energy and gas and dissipate into space. If the process proposed by scientists could produce a planet the size of the Earth, and it can't, the original object would have to be larger than the sun, and helium would be a basic ingredient of the resultant atmosphere. And he's wrong about everything he's saying here. Our atmosphere is mostly nitrogen. Helium is one of the rarest of all gases because it turns into other elements really easily. It is found only in the United States, mainly in Texas. If the Earth was in fact an offshoot of the solar process, There should be pockets of helium everywhere, and but that's just not how the planet was made. It's not an offshoot of the solar process. The planet is made of the same stuff as the planets. I'm sorry, the sun is made of the same stuff as the planets, and dissipate into space is how gases accrete to become other gases. Um, the planet is mostly helium, it's mostly hydrogen or whatever, but the atomic, it's not an atomic bomb. It's not fission, it's not the ripping apart and blowing up of atoms, it's the smashing together of atoms. It's fusion that's happening in the sun, and those atoms fuse together and become heavier elements. That's how suns eventually die, as they run out of the chemical or the helium atoms that they're blowing up, or the hydrogen atoms that they're fusing together into denser, heavier atoms. That's where heavy atoms come from. The singular atomic helium or whatever is so rare because it fuses into other elements in suns. He's just wrong about everything he's saying here. If Earth was in fact an offshoot of the solar process, there should be pockets of helium everywhere. The great dirigibles of the 1920s and 1930s had to be abandoned because of the high cost of helium, led the designers to rely on dangerous hydrogen gas for their gas bags. We know from the study of rock formations that the Earth is around 3 billion years old. Until very recently, astronomers believed the Moon was created about the same time as the Earth and was even made of a piece of material wrenched from the Earth itself. That's still what astronomers teach. If they don't believe that, they certainly still teach it. Um, but the moon rocks brought back by our astronauts indicate the moon is older than the Earth by at least a billion years, and that's not true. Finally, the Earth seems to be dramatically different from all the other planets in our solar system. Most of the others are gaseous. How come? Were the 9 planets created at different times in different ways? No, they were created at the same time with different materials. As we learn more about Mars, we may find that it is far older than the Earth or Moon and could have supported life eons ago. That life no longer exists. Yeah, Mars could have supported life. Did the Martians migrate? Or were they transported somewhere else by metal birds at a certain period in their development? They were microbial. The life on Mars was microbial. If the Pleiadians are a super race with a super culture, maybe they not only have the means for space travel, maybe they also have a technology so incredible they can manipulate whole planets. No. Some of the more mysterious features on our planet could be their handiwork. After earlier colonies had failed or perished, they set up a system of elaborate experiments, dumping some Earthlings in the Arctic, planting others in arid desert regions, and so on. No, this misunderstands geology. At the time that he's thinking, the planet was mostly frozen. They chose to reside temporarily, according to tradition, in the rarefied atmosphere of our highest mountains and in Tibet, while they supervised this fantastic project. That's not what they say. That's just not what the religions or the mythologies say. Some historians have suggested that our memory of the Garden of Eden is really a memory of some other world. Yeah, it's a memory of Sumer when it was a garden. More likely, it's just the memory of bewildered ancients who found themselves suddenly transported to inhospitable deserts, their memories as befuddled as the memories of our modern UFO contactees. That's not the case. All of this is merely an intellectual exercise. It's an intellectual exercise in wild fiction. The case for extraterrestrial life is built upon a very fragile premise. It really is. Probabilities are not certainties. Myths and legends have been so distorted through constant telling and retelling that they are hardly reliable sources for hard facts. Not true, actually. We can only base our speculations on what we know and have learned through the modern appearances and manipulations of unidentified flying objects. And the major lesson of the UFO events is that the source of the objects is occupied with deceiving and confusing us. Our Pleiadians are allegorical, and now he's talking sense. Man's search for extraterrestrial life may be a fruitless enterprise based upon our growing and fearful loneliness. If there are people sitting on a doomed planet in the Pleiades, they may be only sharing our fear and loneliness. If they are, it was millions of years ago. Dr. Lauren Isley, the great naturalist, put it this way a few years ago, quote, "Somewhere across space, great instruments, handled by strange, manipulative organs, may stare vainly at our floating cloud wreck, their owners yearning as we yearn," end quote, millions of years ago, probably before the formation of our solar system. We seek to find meaning in our meaningless existence. We hope that we are not alone, and we view the sky people with optimism as an indication that we are not. But the sky people have always looked back with hollow eyes, viewing us as specimens in some galactic test tube. The ancients who busied themselves with stone constructions oriented with the Pleiades, may have known more about our heritage than we do. They may have yearned not for contact with some extraterrestrial race, but for the hills of home. The hills of home were the place where they migrated from. He doesn't understand deep human time. We migrated a lot, specifically out of Africa, and then back into Africa, and then back out of Africa again, many times. It took a very long time to populate the world the way it is today. It took a very long time. Most of the planet, for most of its history, was uninhabited by humans. Uninhabitable by humans. But the idea that the planet is some galactic test tube isn't a bad one if you think about it based on what we know. We have an extremely young planet in the history of the universe, an extremely young planet. And so if you think about it in terms of a God that can't intervene but is trying to arrive at something, can't intervene on anything but a molecular or energetic level, what that God could do is wait billions and billions and billions of Earth years, because an Earth year is just one cycle of the Earth around its sun, and that's nothing in galactic time. That's nothing in this solar system's time. The time it takes the bigger planets like Jupiter or whatever, even Mars, the further out they are from the planet, the longer it takes. So Mercury time is much faster than Earth time. It's also moving faster, so it's affected by time, space, and gravity in a different way. So he's trying to think in terms of what the universe might be like from a relativistic standpoint, that is, from special relativity. But he doesn't understand it because he doesn't actually know how to think in terms of special relativity. But God does. And so our planet could easily be a test case. Could easily. Just a little bit of manipulation of time, space, gravity, and the amount of matter that's in that region, the amount of energy that's in that region of space. If you just wait 6.5 billion years or whatever, might be perfect for life if you have an unconformity period where 1 billion years of accumulated stuff, volcanic energy, are suddenly swept into a very, very hot Earth ocean that's also capped by ice, which this planet got. But that took another 1 billion years. It took 1 billion years to form the 1 billion years that were erased. 1 billion years. God doesn't give a shit about your time scales. He doesn't give a shit about a meaningful time scale for a 3-act play. God doesn't give a shit about your fucking books. God doesn't give a shit about your fucking Hebrew poetry. God doesn't give a fuck about that. Why the fuck would God give a shit about a creation story that can make sense to a people 2,000 years ago? When he set things in motion 8 or 10 or 21 billion Earth years ago. Earth's cycle, Earth's clock is nothing. It's nothing to cosmic time. And that's just cosmic time from the beginning. 10 to the negative 45 seconds after things happened. But that's just the story as we can tell it, because we can't tell the story before 10 to the negative 45 seconds after things happened. What that means is you take 10 and then you put 45 zeros before it, and then you put a decimal point. That's how long before, that's how long after the Big Bang our math works. But everything before that, the math can't work. We haven't figured out a mathematics that work to explain everything before that. We don't have a story until 10 to the negative 45 seconds after time began. But before that, can't measure before, because we can't measure before 10 to the negative 45 seconds after. Can't describe what happened before that, because we can't describe what happened in that space between what we can describe and what we can't even imagine. And what fits in that gap? 45 zeros before a 1. That's how many seconds we can't describe. Tell me Genesis is better. Continuing, serving man on a platter. Several years ago, a short story appeared describing how the flying saucers arrive on Earth and their pilots quickly win us over with their wisdom and kindness. They even offer to transport large numbers of Earthlings to another planet for a new, more fruitful life. Millions of people clamor to make the trip. Huge spaceships arrive to collect those willing immigrants. In the course of the story, a book discarded by one of the spacemen falls into the hands of a scholar who laboriously translates it. The book is titled How to Serve Man. The story ends with the revelation that it is a cookbook. Now, he's being funny, but while the little apocryphal tale was only pure fantasy, it revived the earlier warning of Charles Fort. He wrote that he suspected this planet was owned by something or somebody, that we are all property. The late Ivan T. Sanderson, a great Fortean thinker, reached a similar conclusion. He suggested that the Earth was a gigantic farm and that we, mankind, are only the crop. Sounds silly, doesn't it? To think that cannibals from outer space might one day land and solve our overpopulation problem overnight. But if you give it just a little thought, you will realize that billions of people have understood and believed this very thing for thousands of years. This belief is the foundation of all our great religions. Mystery Prophecy. In 1966-67, Ivan Sanderson and I appeared together on many speakers' platforms in the Northeast. Wherever we went, someone invariably stood up in the audience and asked us a bizarre question. It was always the same question, and it was always asked in grim seriousness. We heard it mostly on scattered college campuses. So far as we could determine, the question was never even published anywhere. It was just a rumor that had somehow spread over the entire country in those years. Here's how it went. Was it true, the questioner would ask, that flying saucers were landing on college campuses and kidnapping hundreds of students, mostly females, never to be seen again? Was it true, also, that all the relatives, friends, and teachers of the kidnapped students were then being brainwashed in some mysterious manner so that they lost all memory of the missing students? In short, the kidnappings were carried out in such a way that it was as if the victims had never existed. No one who knew them could remember them. Sometimes our questioners would credit this incredible idea to Joan Dickson, the famous Washington seer. Eventually, the rumor did reach her ears, and in 1968, she issued an emphatic denial to the press. She had never said, or even thought about, such a thing. The kidnap plot rumor alarmed and worried a great many people, coming as it did at a time when UFO sightings around colleges were occurring in great numbers. 1968 might also be the exact year of the Boston Strangler. Like, The 60s and 70s and 80s were a heyday for serial killers. So, like, trying to say that serial kidnappings from college campuses, which may have been happening, this widespread white trafficking from college campuses, trying to blame it on UFOs is something that colleges, police officers, and the politicians who were receiving the white slaves would absolutely do. They would absolutely blame it on cults and UFOs for something that they were actively doing. Everyone has heard a story, everyone has read a newspaper clipping of a group of cops who went around in their SWAT van or whatever, kidnapping girls and putting them into white slavery. Everyone has heard about this. If you haven't heard about this, you're trying not to. I heard a story about it happening in Columbus after 2020. We did not know very much about flying saucers in 1968. Only a handful of cultists and cranks were following the UFO situation closely, and relatively few books on the subject were then available to the general public. When he says only a handful of cultists and cranks, he means the entire New Age community. Bob Lazar, a big part of the I Am movement with I Am was Guy and Edna Ballard. A big part of their movement was UFO garbage. The New Age movement in general relies on UFOs to explain all the evil shit they do. Very few people knew that amnesia often seized UFO witnesses, and fewer still were aware that a number of people had apparently been kidnapped by UFOs. So the 1966 rumor was remarkably sophisticated considering the scarcity of UFO information. Yeah, it would be sophisticated when it's a conspiracy by the colleges, the campuses themselves. In 1967, a writer named John Fuller published a non-book based upon a non-book based upon the transcribed testimony of Barney and Betty Hill while under hypnosis. They had been treated by a psychiatrist for emotional problems suffered after a strange encounter with a UFO in 1961, and we know today that it was all bullshit. The actual recordings of their recollection under hypnosis are hours long, and when Fuller condensed the tapes for his book, he left out many important details, like him feeding them information. Details which tend to discredit the reality of their remembered experience, no reality whatsoever. But Fuller's book on the Hill case was a bombshell. Among other things, it implied that the flying saucers were, in fact, capable of inducing amnesia. The Hills had no conscious memory of the story they related under hypnosis. An even more condensed version appeared in a national magazine, lending undue credibility to an already incredible situation and inadvertently supporting the rumor. In summary, the Hills recalled being taken aboard a flying saucer in the mountains of New Hampshire and being subjected to a medical examination there. They were then told they would remember nothing of the experience, and they didn't, until recurrent nightmares drove them to the psychiatrist. Yeah, not real. Curious backlash. They were a mixed race couple in the 60s. So they were just doing this to get attention as something other than a mixed race couple. Curious backlash. Although the authenticity of the Hill story can be seriously questioned, no, it can be just thrown out as garbage. It did produce a curious backlash. Other people came forward with similar stories, all garbage, some dating back to the 1940s, still garbage. These people had remained silent for years because they were making things up when they came out, fearing ridicule because they were making it up. Essentially, they all recalled being stopped on lonely highways and taken into some kind of structure, not always a flying saucer, where they were thoroughly examined medically. Characteristically, their memories of these episodes were as cloudy as the hills. But historical records of this kind of adventure cover the past 2,000 years. No, they don't. Not as anything but fiction. There is nothing new here. Even Alexander the Great was taken to the moon and a flying fish. And it's not a UFO story, it's a fiction. There's a travelogue, there's a parody travelogue from the Roman era of a guy who went to the moon on a pleasure cruise. Didn't happen. It's a fiction. Know the difference in facts and fictions. Just know the difference in what is and what cannot be a fiction. There is nothing new here. Earthlings have been suffering strange distortions of reality ever since. Occult and religious lore and the widespread fairy stories of the Middle Ages all recount the same thing. No, they don't. He's reaching. Mrs. Hill recalled some kind of long needle being thrust into her abdomen. This needle feature can be found in stories dating back 500 years. Because she knew the witch lore is why she did that. When you view all these tales in toto, that means he means on toto, it sounds as if someone has been periodically collecting human beings and inspecting them as we might inspect cattle. The flying saucer believers of the 1960s tried to find all kinds of meaning in Fuller's fragmented account of the Hill case. They saw it as proof that curious visitors from another planet were merely studying a sample of life here. But there is really much more to it. Much more. Someone from somewhere has been keeping close tabs on us for thousands of years. I don't know about for anti-grav development for whatever you're thinking. MIT, Yale, these places, the techs they're developing are never harmful. It's Boston Dynamics that you want to be afraid of. They're not doing these things for world-dominating military technology reasons. They're doing them for transportation and infrastructure reasons. If we have anti-grav tech, we can build taller, heavier buildings that are more weather resistant, easier. If we have anti-grav tech, trains cost less. Well, Boston Dynamics, whether they do or do not do anything, whether they do or do not accomplish anything, they are the ones that have military contracts, Joe. I don't know why you contradict me with my point. Yeah, your point's that they have military contracts, but they don't accomplish anything. Who gives a shit? They are the ones that have military contracts, which is what I said. Address my point or don't address me. They don't make fake robot videos. China makes fake robot videos. And Boston Dynamics absolutely does accomplish things all the time. They educate, empower, and help fund young college students who go off to improve the world all the time. So just tell me you don't know anything without telling me you don't know anything about anything. Like what's your specialty? Watching Joe Rogan? Masturbating? What are you good at, Joe? What do you know about? What do you spend your time with? No reason to hate someone that stupid. What if I don't want to forgive you? What if I want to hold this against you forever? What if I no longer feel like being merciful to stupid people? What if I feel like giving you your just desserts? Speaking to you in the same manner that you speak to me? What if that's where I'm at right now? What if tolerating your dumbass is just so far beneath me and my consideration that I'm just not even going to do it anymore? I'm not even going to take the time. What if my rib hurts so fucking bad right now that I have no patience for your stupid fucking ass. What then? Continuing from John Keel, Disneyland of the Gods. In 1925, Charles Fort wrote that, quote, ships from other worlds have been seen by millions of the inhabitants of this world, exploring night after night in the sky of France, England, New England, and Canada. Ellipsated, end quote. Fort was reporting a phenomenon which would not officially exist for another 22 years, and which ceased to exist officially in 1969, when the U.S. Air Force quietly put away its flying saucer chasing equipment. The odd little man with the walrus mustache knew something the governments of the world did not. He knew from his extensive research into scientific journals and old magazines that mysterious machines and aerial constructions had been widely seen throughout history, that the occupants of these marvels had been often viewed by amazed earthlings, and, in fact, some of man's most cherished myths were based upon contact with such objects. One example is the legend of the Watchers. Strange beings from some other place or some other space-time continuum have always been sitting in our skies, silently watching us struggle upward from our caves. In the mountains of Tibet, the ancient lamas knew all about the Watchers. Occasionally, Westerners would stumble upon them too, in that distant and inhospitable land. Nicholas Roerich, the artist, explorer, and humanitarian, reported seeing gleaming metal discs soaring above the Himalayas in the 1920s. Frank Smith, the famous mountain climber, observed a pulsating tea kettle hovering nearby as he struggled alone up the face of a mountain in Nepal. Before he saw it, he had the uneasy feeling that something or someone was watching. Phone died. Whoops. What? My friends are fucking insane. People I actually consider my friends are actually insane. My phone died in the middle of the paragraph, so I'll return to the middle of that paragraph once I know Eric is still with me. I don't have any way of contacting Eric to say, hey, pal, sorry, phone died. My bad. Phone died, my bad. Forgot to plug my phone in. Kinda need to be paying attention to whether it's actually charging right now. For a little while, anyway. There we go. It is charging. Frank Smith, the famous mountain climber, observed a pulsating tea kettle hovering nearby as he struggled alone up the face of a mountain in Nepal. Before he saw it, he had the uneasy feeling that something or someone was watching him. Whoops. I'm trying to do two things. Benevolently, was the watcher, as if concerned about his safety. This is a common story. This is a common archetype. In the big UFO years of 1966-68, missionaries on the Himalayan roof of the world wrote letters describing their own encounters with the phantom aircraft. During that same period, a handful of scientists laboring in remote Antarctica were reportedly watching great circular objects soaring over ice fields near the South Pole. But here's the thing about the whole being up on the big mountains and feeling like you're being watched and like that thing is benevolent. That's one of the things that happens in extreme cold and extreme oxygen deprivation. So it was environmental, had nothing to do with someone actually watching him. The Watchers enjoyed another year of tourism over this cosmic Disneyland in 1973-75. If this were real, you would hear these stories ad nauseum now that Mount Everest is a tourist destination. You would hear these stories ad nauseum. They would just be everywhere on Instagram and TikTok. The Everest isn't a tourist destination because you can go and see UFOs above it, because you can go and get visitations from heavenly watchers. Everest is a tourist destination because it's an easy athletic adventure that rich people can pay to have. The Watchers enjoyed another year of tourism over this cosmic Disneyland in 1973-75, popping up almost everywhere at once, and then disappearing as suddenly and mysteriously as they had come. From the long history of this phenomenon, we know we haven't seen the last of them. They will be back, and a new generation of young people will stand on the Earth's hills and study the night skies expectantly. And I can promise you they just won't see anything. You just won't see anything. Or it's not there to be seen. You might see military aircraft if you live close enough to places where test aircraft are flown, Arizona, Ohio, but you're not going to see the things that he's talking about. You're not going to have the experiences he's talking about because they weren't happening then. And people used to be a lot more drunk. People used to do a lot more illicit drugs and not talk about it back then. People used to be a lot more bored. Boredom in its own right can make your brain see things. Gods are spacemen. One morning in the year 40,000 BC, a hairy man animal heard a buzzing sound outside his cave. When he crept to the entrance, he was stunned to see a strange intrusion into his rugged environment. A gleaming metallic object rimmed with transparent windows. Behind those windows stood the tall, silent watchers, their faces dark and expressionless. The man animal retreated and, for the benefit of his descendants, sketched the object onto the stone wall of his cave. The sketches still exist in Africa, Australia, France, and China. Were these watchers gods, as the first man supposed them to be, or astronauts from some distant planet? The only problem he has is that he doesn't know when those were drawn. The caves in France weren't humans. Those weren't Homo sapiens. Those were Neanderthal drawing on the caves in France and Spain, probably Australia, Africa, and China as well. They weren't Homo sapiens doing that. It was a long, long time before Homo sapiens existed that those caves were being dwelt in and drawn upon. Perhaps the Watchers were Earthlings, beings from a splendid continent separated and protected by the oceans from the hostile jungles of the cavemen, thriving in a land where magic and technology were one. If you've got jungles, you don't need caves. We emerged out of the jungles because the jungles stopped being a thing. The jungles became grasslands. That's why we're upright. If they were jungles, we wouldn't have needed caves. You don't need a cave to hide from predators in a jungle. You hide in the jungle. Their flying machines spanned the world, and they watched with detachment as the man animal appeared and multiplied. Later, as the men spread slowly across the landscape, the Watchers came forward from the skies and from the seas to offer gentle assistance. And see, this is imagining the Indo-European spread too early. This is what it was like when Indo-Europeans came into places where non-Indo-European speaking people lived. But this is 5,000 years ago. This isn't far enough. What he's describing didn't happen far enough back to be what he's describing. They taught men to farm and gave them the fundamentals of law and mathematics. Except it was Indo-Europeans that did that 3,500 BCE, not 40,000 BCE. 40,000 BCE, there were no Homo sapiens sapiens. And farming wasn't happening 40,000 years ago. 40,000 years ago was fucking Homo erectus. Man, in turn, dedicated his greatest works to these gods. He carved their images from blocks of stones. And again, that wasn't 40,000 years ago. If he was carving their images in blocks of stones, why was he painting in caves? He's mistaken. The arts, he's conflating many, many, many different centuries and millennia, and he's putting them all too far back. The arts of dance, painting, and storytelling all began as a means paying tribute to the wondrous Watchers. Except the Watchers are the dead. The Watchers are ancestors. He's right. Painting, dancing, storytelling. But it began to reverence the dead. All of that remains a way to remember the dead. Over time, and the dead are who are watching from the sky. Over time, the benign watchers changed. They demanded first animal sacrifices, then human sacrifices. This is true, except it was the dead. Yeah, my phone died, Eric. They claimed credit for natural disasters, and men began to fear them. Around the world, great pyramids were built, and beautiful young women were left in temples on their summits at special times of the year. The gods came down from the sky and, according to legend, mated with the human women. That's not what happened. Yes, sacrifices happen. But the gods coming down from the sky and mating with these women isn't what happened. What happened is what I'm telling you from my other books. Human people would wear clothes that was God breathed or God inspired. They would wear the clothes. They would be the guy. They would fuck her, and then his offspring in her wasn't his child. It was the God born in that child's body. So, Christians, you got a lot of explaining to do for how Jesus got in Mary, because that used to happen all the fucking time. It makes a lot of sense, Eric. It makes a lot of sense. Because who the child belonged to is the only thing that used to matter. Because this idea that humans didn't know how sex worked and what happened with sex, that only happened when white people showed up in Africa and they could pretend they didn't know how sex worked so they could get free money. What do you mean it makes no sense? It makes perfect sense. What doesn't make sense about it? I'll stop in the middle of this chapter and we can talk about what makes sense about it, because I talk about this all the time. I've talked about it multiple times in this book. Because he gets this wrong, all of his building up from getting this wrong has to be wrong. And anthropology is only just start. The angel babies only make sense. It only makes sense. Okay, so Eric, before about no, listen to me. Before about 3500 BCE, there was what is believed by anthropologists and described by anthropologists to be a genuine, egalitarian, golden age. The period of human history between 6000 BCE and the invention of writing in 3500 BCE is believed by anthropologists and experts in deep history to be a true golden age of human civilization and development. And the reason they believe this is because every grave they've dug up around the world from that era of history, that 2500 year span, is identical. There are no graves that are special. Nobody gets special grave offerings that somebody else doesn't get. But starting around 3500 BCE, and I'm being fiddly, but starting around 3500 BCE with the invention of writing, that stops being the case. 3500 BCE is also when the language that you are speaking is in a family called Indo-European. The Indo-European language family also emerged onto the world stage with Proto-Indo-European around 3500 BCE. Okay? Agriculture was not developed 40,000 years ago. Agriculture was developed between 11 and 30,000 years ago. If you want to stretch it back to 15,000, that's fine, but it wasn't developed worldwide. Worldwide, the spread of agriculture out of Anatolia and southern Ukraine, that happened coinciding with, and because of the Indo-European language family spread. The Indo-European language family did something that no other language family has ever done. It spread from a single point all across the northern hemisphere. Hello, Hunter. It took with it, the Indo-European language family, took with it knowledge of how to do agriculture, knowledge of arithmetic, knowledge of the wheel, knowledge of animal husbandry, and war fighting. It also brought with it an extremely sophisticated and very simple storytelling structure, system, machine. And with that, it conquered the Northern Hemisphere. But the story he's telling here of people who are already there and already know the land and already live in harmony with the land and already pre-exist, teaching men to farm and giving them the fundamentals of law and mathematics, that did not happen until Indo-European groups got so far enough away from one another that their languages had speciated, and then they came and found one another again. It did not happen 40,000 years ago. Our people groups, our population groups were so small and so diffuse, so far apart from one another, and so small that there was no knowing how to live here expertly. Not 40,000 years ago. We can't live, back then, we couldn't live in big communities without killing one another. It would be a lot of stuff to dig and find. And in 1985, they had dug a lot of it, but they didn't understand what they'd dug yet. It's been 40 years. We understand it very well now. This is what I wanted to do professionally, and I married a woman that wanted to do this professionally. I cared deeply about this subject. Deep ancient human antiquity. 40,000 years ago, the time period that he wants these watchers to exist in, he's chosen because in the 80s there was an engineer who said, oh, the pyramids seem to have been underwater for 40,000 years. And so he wants the pyramids to have been built 40,000 years ago by aliens. And it wasn't. It was built something like 5,000 years ago. It was built sometime at the top of my dome between 3,500 and 2,500 BCE. The pyramid is kind of the big example of when life went from egalitarian to deeply autocratic. It didn't exist, Eric. It didn't exist. The Gaza, the Giza Plateau is the one in Egypt. It wasn't underwater like that. Not like that. And not when they want it to be. The sandstone, the limestone all over there was underwater. Limestone forms when iron-rich dirt. I think I got no, not iron-rich. Sandstone happens when hot dirt gets real cold. Hot, wet dirt gets real cold. So what happened is the Gaza was underwater, but it was under hot water, and then it was exposed to cold air. But that was because the world froze north of it. But it wasn't underwater in human terms. It was underwater because the Mediterranean flooded like 300,000 years before human terms. The Mediterranean flooded like 1,000,000 years ago or something, 1,000,000.3 years ago or something like that. It happened long before human memory. And so people want to put the flooding of the Mediterranean at the same time or after the pyramids were built, and they're just wrong. Now, when these ideas were floating out and they were putting them together, they didn't know any different because these ideas were these observations were first made in the 1800s. It's 200 years ago from our perspective. They're just wrong. Yes, not even brilliant people come up with stupid ideas like this today because they didn't know any better. This is the thing that modern people don't understand, is that in the 1800s, you could be as wildly speculative as you wanted because wild speculation, very wild speculation in the 1800s was proving to be true, actually. Like petroleum, right? Like diesel, right? Internal combustion engines, right? Electricity could do miracles. So you could speculate wildly. Even back then, evolution, like the things that we understand today to be normal about evolution was wild speculation to them. The things that we know to be fact about geology today, wild speculation to them. The stink of bullshit in this work is high enough that the smoke alarm has gone off. That's why I'm reading this. But I'm reading it post-ironically to scare you because people are stupid enough to think that this bullshit is honey. And they'll put it on everything. They think it cures wounds. They literally believe that the Sphinx and the pyramids were underwater. They have no reason to believe that. They weren't. But they believe they were understanding water. And they weren't. The Nile Delta used to flood a lot deeper than it does today. But the Nile Delta also used to be right up on the Mediterranean. The Nile Delta is shaped the way it is because 1.5 million years ago, it was a canyon many times deeper than the Grand Canyon that backfilled with silt because the Mediterranean was right in it. You understand what I'm saying? The things they were observing in the 1800s. They were observing them accurately. But they did not understand what they were seeing because they didn't understand geological time. You got to remember, in the 1800s, they also thought the planet was only 6,000 years old. That was the best they could come to. They were wrong, but that was... And that silt is also miles deep. You hear what I'm saying? Maybe not miles. But it's deeper than the Grand Canyon. The sand silt that Egypt sits on, that the Nile Delta like sits on, is like many times deeper, in fact, than the Grand Canyon. That's why we still talk about it, right? Because it's fertile. Because it's silt. Yeah. Because it's mountain dirt. Right. It's not sand like you think about around a Mediterranean Ocean that shrunk in size, which is what they think happened. It's not what happened. They think that's what happened because they haven't kept up with the last 200 years of geology, because that's a lot of work. But that's what actually happened. All right, I'm going to move on now. Thank you for letting me talk about that. And so, as I was saying, over time, the benign watchers changed. They demanded first animal sacrifices, then human sacrifices. They claimed credit for natural disasters, and men began to fear them. Around the world, great pyramids were built, and beautiful young women were left in temples on their summits at special times of the year. And again, he means 40,000 BP, and that's wrong. The gods came down from the sky and, according to legend, mated with the human women. These women bore special children, giants with incredible physical and psychic strength, who assumed command of tribes and whole nations. The only problem, I need to tell you something here as we're talking about this. The only problem is that this is only in one myth. That myth is the Book of Enoch, and the Book of Enoch is dated to something like 300 AD. That can't be right. Like 300 BCE. The Book of Enoch had a very specific publication date. And it wasn't 40,000 BPE. This myth does not have those kind of legs. The world was divided into a score of zones or kingdoms, each ruled over by one of these hybrid kings. To preserve their godly lineage, the royal families intermarried. But the Watchers retained control by appearing frequently before the kings and issuing orders, even laying the plans of battle for ancient wars. Men were disciplined to obey the kings and their gods without question. Again, this is only true of the Indo-European language family. Hello, Sandra. This is only true after about 3,500 BCE, not 40,000. He's wrong. In a sense, these gods owned the earth and had direct control over all its inhabitants through the god-king system. No, not the gods owned the gods owned everything through the god-king system, but not 40,000 years ago, and not in the way that he's saying. And they didn't have direct control. They owned everything because, like I was telling you, Eric, in the 1500 years before that, they had the perfect egalitarian system where no one owned anything. The gods owned everything. Not the time, Sandra. A system still in effect in many parts of the world into the 20th century. He's right, but he's getting it wrong. I think we're property. Charles Fort recognized the subtle warp and woof of human history when he stated, quote, I think we're property. Someone owns this earth. All others warned off. End quote. The gods were at one time very real, and their directives to mankind were not initiated out of concern for the human condition, but calculated to protect the earth itself. Not true. The stories, the thing that he's talking about, the sacrifice stuff, the human sacrifice, the animal sacrifice, this was all calculated to keep the family alive because the family unit was the only thing that mattered. Making sure that there could be a next generation was the only thing that mattered. It was the only thing that mattered. And we know this is true because we have letters. We have letters even from merchants who are like, sell the house, sell the slaves, sell all the land. The only thing that matters is that the children can eat. That was the only thing that mattered. Man was caught up as the pawn in some dark and forbidding celestial chess game. That is only true after the totalitarian god kings of later Sumer. But that's just not true over the whole world. It's only true in Sumer and Egypt. It's not even true in China. Events that seemed totally senseless to one generation would suddenly acquire important meaning several generations later. And that's not true either. Everybody understood the events that were happening as they were happening. It was only later that they got confused and reinterpreted. And he's trying to say that they got it right, but he's not reading his Plato, because Plato and Socrates were saying that they were getting it wrong in the Periclean era. We tried to rationalize our predicament with inventive theologies, in the Periclean era, by the way, is about 450 BCE, so he's wrong. He's just wrong. We tried to rationalize, says John Keel, our predicament with inventive theologies and cosmologies. We rewrote history until it matched our ideals and concealed our often ugly motivations. That's true. Our true history became myth, and our myths became our substitute for history. That's only part true. That part of history and prehistory which lay beyond our feeble memories was filled in for us by entities who professed to belong to the Watchers. Sort of. An oral history was passed on to the men who consorted with the Watchers, and we accepted much of it without question. If you replace the Watchers with the dead ancestors, then he's right on. That's what the shaman were doing. An oral history was passed on to the men who consorted with the Watchers, and we accepted much of it without question. After the great libraries of China and Egypt were destroyed, the Library of Egypt was destroyed in the Christian era. It didn't have information about aliens and how the pyramids were built. By the Greek era, the pyramids were a mystery. The pyramids were a mystery very shortly after their construction. Very shortly after their construction, their civilization saw a total collapse that even left them speaking a different language. Sort of. Coptic goes back to that time, but they could no longer read the hieroglyphs. We passed through ages of magic when superstition and fear of the unknown cast deep shadows across the human psyche. Correct. The late Bronze Age collapse. But that didn't happen 40,000 years ago. That happened 32,000 years ago. Later, 3,200 years ago. 1200 BCE, give or take. 1187 is the book. 1177 BCE, the day civilization collapsed, or the year civilization collapsed, or something like that is the book. Read the book. Great book. Great writer. 1178 is a great book, too. Later, when we embraced anew the cosmic, or after 1177 is actually the name of the book. Also a great book. Later, when we embraced anew the cosmic overlords and became enslaved in the Dark Ages, we rewrote history again. That's true. That's how the Bible was written. But that didn't happen when he thinks. This and became enslaved in the Dark Ages is total fucking poetic license, because the enslavement that he's referring to is the enslavement of Anatolian Greeks by the Persians. And that happened in history. Like, that happened in history. That didn't happen with mythology. Herodotus writes about this. The 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 Persian Wars have books that were written by people who fought in them. That's not what he's talking about. Yeah, playing with toys is what he's doing, because they didn't have this stuff. And the people who are reading this, the people who are interested in this stuff, they're dumb. They're too dumb to actually go and read the Peloponnesian War or the Persian Wars. They're too dumb to just go and read Xenophon. Why are they too dumb? Reading that old literature feels old. So let's read John Keel when he publishes anew in 1988. And in 1848, he continues, we began the long, painful escape from the God-King system and entered the modern industrial age. Political ideologies replaced religion as the forces which moved us, and the old gods grew misty and mythical, while the new gods, the alleged beings from outer space, appeared in our farm fields. What did I tell you? These ideas that he has were picked up in the 1800s. Again, in 1848. Is Ishtar, he asks, the self-appointed chief of the Intergalactic Federation, merely an updated version of Ashtoreth, the multi-breasted goddess of the ancients? The problem is that Ashtar isn't her name, it was Ishtar, and Ashtoreth is actually a younger version, not an older version. He's got them backward. Meanwhile, back in Atlantis, about 300 years ago, we stopped believing in witches, goblins, and leprechauns and became very scientific. We finally figured out that the Earth revolves around the sun instead of vice versa. That didn't happen 300 years ago. We figured that out during the philosophic age of Athens. So around or after the Periclean era. If it wasn't one of the pre-Socratics, it was one of the post-Socratic philosophers. We even discovered that the blood in our bodies circulates through veins. That, again, didn't happen 300 years ago. It was confirmed and it was mechanistically described, but it wasn't found. In 1969, Neil Armstrong came back from the moon with the news that it wasn't made out of green cheese, after all. There is, however, disquieting evidence that none of this information is new. Our planet is at least 3 billion years old, and there is growing evidence that great civilizations existed here while our ancestors were still climbing trees. That's just not true. There's no evidence of that. They probably knew all about the circulation of blood and the mineral content of the moon. Actually, they did know the mineral content of the moon. They were right in Periclean Athens. The Socratics or pre-Socratics, they knew. The philosophers, they were right. And they seem to have known things about our planet that we are still trying to rediscover. In the 1920s, a man named Alfred Watkins stood on a hilltop in England and suddenly noticed something no one else in modern times had bothered to see. Stretched out along the rolling hills were thin lines of tracks, impossibly pursuing absolutely straight courses for miles. They traversed impossible terrain, loping up steep mountains, cutting across swamps and bogs, connecting England's most ancient stone monuments like Stonehenge and the tumuli, man-made mounds. These tracks, or lays as they are now called, were apparently laid out thousands of years ago by some unknown race for some unknown purpose, and this is all total bullshit. The lays are total bullshit. What he noticed is that Roman roads connected pre-Roman sites because there were people living in them. This idiot is working off. He's working off an assumption that the people who lived in the British Isles when the Romans showed up were pre-Stone Age retards, and they were just wrong. The British government is constantly surprised by their actual history in the ground. Accompanying these lays are mammoth man-made ridges of earth, which do not appear to have served any practical purpose. They could not have been part of some irrigation system, and they are too low to serve as fortifications. What they serve is ways to show that you are in a settled land. They show that people live here And as you're walking through our countryside, we've made it beautiful because we have the time and the resources to do so. To compound the mystery, they didn't know. They didn't know in 1987 that the Qumri people, the Britain people, were a civilization. They were a trading civilization on par with Rome. They didn't know that. They didn't know about the Bronze Age Germanic tribes. They didn't know how much tin was being traded out of Britain in 1988. No one did. It's only very recently that we've learned this stuff. To compound the mystery, Watkins lays are by no means unique to England. Identical systems can be found in South America, Africa, China, and elsewhere, because the Romans weren't the only people who did roads. He said earlier in the book that the only reason that cities were built was for religion, and that's not true. The only reason cities were built was for trade. And so these straight lines that travel between cities, between important sites, happened because people were trading. And what's the shortest distance between 2 points? At one time in the distant past, primitive men everywhere were engaged in the construction of these tracks and the strange monuments that adorned them. Yeah, they weren't primitive, though. They weren't primitive. They were just as intelligent and just as industrious as you and I. Enormous labor must have been required, with thousands of people struggling generation after generation to haul baskets of dirt and huge stones, sometimes for hundreds of miles, to build them. But why? Because commerce. That's why. Traces of a lost world. On many remote Pacific islands, there are vast stoneworks, as impressive as Stonehenge. Some of these monuments are made of stones not even found on the islands. Or on the coral atoll of Tonga Tabu, for example, we found 2 upright stone columns, weigh 70 ton each, topped by a crosspiece weighing 25 tons. How did the builders get these huge stones to the atoll in the first place? And why did they bother? The ancient city of Metalanim on the shore of Ponape Island in Micronesia is now in ruins, but it once could have housed 2 million people. No one knows who built it or when. Some of the blocks in these ruins weigh 15 tons, and the stone used in the city is not from the island. Canals and waterways intersect the city, some of them big enough to float a battleship. Ugh. Commerce, folks. Commerce was happening. Commerce. 3,000 miles to the southeast of Ponape Island, on tiny Malden Island in the Line Island chain, probably Line, there are the ruins of 40 stone temples whose architecture is identical to that of Metalanim. Basalt roads lead from these ruins into the Pacific Ocean. The island is uninhabited and covered with guano, bird droppings. But if we draw an imaginary line southward from Malden for 1,200 miles, we arrive at Rarotonga in the Cook Islands. Here, another ancient road of basalt blocks rises out of the ocean. Now, it's not impossible that during the Ice Age, when the ice caps were frozen, and we know there was a land bridge between North America and China, that people in the southern Pacific, where it wasn't cold, were walking on land. It's not impossible. That's in human time, though. Other scattered Pacific islands boast of huge man-made mounds like those found throughout the United States and England, and strange statuary though the natives of the Pacific were not statue builders. The intricate networks of lays in England is somehow connected to similar formations in China on the other side of the world. And another thing that he's ignoring is that you have time and the desire to build things like this if you also have food. These islands, the reason they're uninhabited is because they no longer had food. For a while they had food because they were connected by trade routes. And then they didn't have food anymore. Great man-made ridges have been measured from the air in Florida, England, and Peru. The rigid field at Lake Titicaca, and the Andes covers 200,000 acres and is spread over 160 miles. All of these things seem to be interrelated, as if they were once part of some great civilization, a common culture that spread throughout the world and then died, or a common human desire to shape our environment. I was talking with Rach about this morning, and I should have been talking about it live, but maybe Rachel will show up someday and jump in the comments about how, yeah, he was talking to me about this. In the last century, stone chests dug up in the mounds of the Mississippi Valley were found to be identical to chests unearthed in mounds in Yorkshire, England. I don't talk to you guys the way I talk to her, because you motherfuckers don't listen. You motherfuckers will interrupt me. You motherfuckers will contradict me. But we call the American tumuli Indian mounds, even though the American Indians deny any knowledge of who built them or why. Yeah, because there was a people here before the American Indians got here. They were just gone and had been died out for a long time. In the early 1800s, a great religion was founded by a boy named Joseph Smith, who discovered a stone chest filled with gold plates in a mound in New York State. No, he didn't. He claimed to be able to translate the plates and so produce the Mormon Bible, a purported history of North America in ancient times. He did make that claim, and he's wrong. A number of scholars, and not a few crackpots, have studied these archaeological mysteries and accepted them as evidence for the lost continents of Atlantis and Mu, or Lemuria. Lemuria happened, Mu didn't, and no, they didn't. Nobody has confirmed Mormonism. The story of the Book of Mormon is very dumb. The Joseph Smith is the founder of Mormonism, Gina. And in fact, these things do seem to verify ancient myths of a superculture that blossomed in the Atlantic or Pacific thousands of years ago. No, it doesn't. But the people that wanted to give money to someone, that it did in fact give money to Joseph Smith, wanted to believe this shit, so he gave them a myth that unified all the things they wanted to believe into one myth system that also allowed them to fuck teenage girls. And in fact, these things do seem to verify ancient myths of a superculture that blossomed in the Atlantic or Pacific thousands of years ago. No, they don't. All they do is confirm that Mormons are pedophiles. When you toss other things into the pot, such as the Piri Reis maps, a startling picture of the ancient world takes form. The Piri Reis maps were made in 1513, apparently copied from much earlier maps, and depict parts of the world then unknown, including Antarctica. And the only thing I know about the Piri Reis maps is that the only person who talks about them today is Graham Hancock, and that therefore they must have been a hoax. By no other reason than that Graham Hancock is the only person who insists on bringing them up. They have to be a hoax, and an easily debunked hoax. Where did they go? We have a reasonably complete history of the past 2,000 years and a half-baked archaeological reconstruction of the past 5,000 years. Actually, we have a very, very good reconstruction of the past 10,000 years. But there are so many gaps in our knowledge that most of the popular archaeological theories really have very little merit. In 1987, that was maybe true. In 2008, that stopped being true. Indeed, we can't even be sure that the Egyptians built the Great Pyramid of Giza. Yes, we can. Peter Tompkins, a leading authority on the pyramid, has stated, quote, as more is discovered, it may open the door to a whole new civilization of the past and a much longer history of man than has heretofore been credited, end quote. No, it can't. It is generally assumed that the British Isles were populated by scattered tribes of very primitive cavemen types at the time Stonehenge and the Lays were built. Yeah, that's because those people are wrong. Yet recent computer studies have shown that Stonehenge was a very sophisticated structure built by someone with a modern knowledge of astronomy. It was hardly the work of cavemen, correct. And the Lays were already ancient when the Romans invaded. In fact, the Romans built some of their roads along the old Lays. That's correct, because they weren't Lays. They were roads. The Great Pyramid may have already been in existence when the first Egyptian empires were formed. No. Just as the great mounds of North and South America were already here when the first Indians arrived on the scene. The unanswerable question is, who preceded modern man and what happened to them? We know Homo habilis, Homo erectus, Homo neanderthalensis, Homo denisovensis. We know this. We know the answer to this. Whoever they were inspired by something or someone to construct great mound markings which can only be seen from the air. The Lays of England had gone unnoticed for hundreds of years, until Mr. Watkins spotted them from his hilltop. Since then, aerial surveys have discovered gigantic figures cut into the hills and valleys of Great Britain. The ground markings didn't go unnoticed. They went unremarked on. There are giant horses and even the form of a huge caveman brandishing a club. It is almost as if someone were marking a hill to inform aerial visitors, cavemen live here. No, the pony, like the horse and the naked guy with the giant balls carved into the I think they're actually salt. I think it's actually salt of the mountain. That's just because they could. And they could see them from faraway mountains. You can see them. You can see them from the ground. Yeah, it's like the Wiltshire pony or whatever. Humans did that because they had the food and the time to amuse themselves. Yeah, it's a salt mountain. They knew what they were doing. They knew what they were carving into. They knew what they were making. They knew what they were doing, and they were doing it to amuse themselves because they had visitors for reasons of commerce. They knew they would have strangers in their landmass that they could say, "Hey, you want to see something cool we did?" Why did our mysterious ancestors devote so much time and energy building these seemingly worthless mounds and designs? Because they weren't worthless. They attracted visitors who brought money and trade. The tracks of the dragons. Until Marco Polo's adventurous journey, China was very isolated from the Western world. There was no communication between ancient China and ancient Britain. Yet both of these widely separated countries maintained identical legends of great dragons. Their legends are not identical. Along the lays of England, there are innumerable churches and monuments raised to commemorate historic battles with fierce dragons, hideous animals which were described in much the same way as the Chinese dragons. They were not described the same way as the Chinese dragons at all. The um, the dragons of the British Isles of the English language are four-legged. They're basically crocodiles. They're just four-legged big snakes. Sometimes they're just big snakes. And the dragons of Chinese are spirits. They're invisible. They're imaginary. But the Chinese dragon lore extended beyond mere fights with wild dragons, or wild animals. The Chinese laid out dragon paths, noting that weird flying objects appeared year after year, following the same routes. These routes became sacred, and persons of high position were carefully buried in mounds planted along these routes. Okay, but China is a major tourist destination for people with camera phones, and if this stuff is true, they would have caught it. It's just not true. He can talk about this in English. He can talk about China like this in English because Chinese people weren't reading it, and there was nobody gonna fact check him about China. Just nobody was gonna fact check him about this stuff. Back in 1987, this was published in 1988. Nobody was fact checking this. Nobody was going to say he was wrong because nobody was visiting China because China did not have an open economy back then. They have an open economy now. People tour. You can just watch people tour around China. Fuck, one of my favorite YouTubers is an archaeologist who toured around China. If there were things to see in the sky, he would have, because he took a selfie video of himself walking across that bridge that's like a mile in the sky. If there was something to see, he would have seen it. In the 1950s, France's leading ufologist, Aimé Michel, discovered that UFOs followed specific routes over France year after year. Other ufologists, such as the late Dr. Fontes of Brazil, extended this discovery and tried to trace worldwide UFO routes. This straight line mystery became a ufological controversy. Some scientists said it worked, others called it hogwash, because it's hogwash. Here in the US, it's been noted that UFOs seem to appear frequently in the mound areas of UFO, etc., and even seem to traverse lines between such areas. This planet is surrounded by a magnetic field which follows different courses in different parts of the world. Places marked by magnetic anomalies and compass deviations do seem to experience more UFO sightings than places where the natural magnetism is more normal. Even more peculiar is the fact that many of the ancient temples of both the East and West were carefully built directly over magnetic anomalies. How did the ancient peoples locate these spots? Was their science as advanced as our own? It could be that they located these places through observation alone, by studying the flights of mysterious objects century after century until they had determined their exact routes and could mark the places where those routes intersected. Did they then lay out designs on the ground to guide these aerial visitors to pay homage to them in some way? And the whole studying electromagnetism thing that he's complaining about here too remains true. The tragedy of Wilhelm Reich. Dr. Wilhelm Reich was recognized as one of the most brilliant psychiatrists of his day. He was a close friend and colleague of Sigmund Freud. His books on psychiatry have become standard texts. But in the 1950s, Dr. Reich was seized by a strange obsession. He retired to a house in Maine to work on an elaborate theory. He came to believe that there is a high frequency field of force surrounding us which supplies energy and life. He called it orgone. In many ways, Reich's orgone theories duplicated ancient Chinese beliefs. He suspected that UFOs, which he saw frequently in Maine, somehow used this orgone for their propulsion, and he constructed instruments which, believe it or not, caused UFOs to explode or dissipate. Today, many scientists are engaged in research similar to Reich's. We may be on the threshold of new discoveries, which will explain some of these ancient mysteries. But, in a sense, history just seems to be repeating itself. We may be only rediscovering the things the ancients knew. Yeah, many of the things we have discovered recently were only rediscovery. Things the ancients knew, for sure. I've been telling you that forever. For the past 10 years, German scientists from the Max Planck Institute of Extraterrestrial Physics, Munich, have been working with NASA to chart the Earth's magnetic field. Hundreds of rockets have been launched into the upper stratosphere all over the world, where they release clouds of barium gas. These luminous clouds spread out in the magnetic field like iron fillings clustering about a magnet. These experiments and many others like them have gone largely unnoticed by the public, but modern science is coming to grips with these problems and mysteries. Dr. Reich may one day be vindicated and hailed as a great pioneer. Linking the mysteries. Evidence that ancient people had an incredible knowledge of astronomy has been found throughout the world. Stone calendars found in South America are accurate down to a decimal point. Ancient records from the Middle East reveal knowledge that could only have been gained through the use of telescopes and sophisticated instrumentation. The intricate ley systems of Britain and China prove that the ancient peoples knew as much, or more, about the Earth's magnetic field as we do. Many legends of early man suggest that the sky people who once visited the Earth taught us the rudiments of agriculture and astronomy. Nope. These mysterious gods were of such great importance in the lives of the ancients that the only traces left of some ancient civilizations are the stone monuments and temples built in tribute to the gods. Is it possible, we must ask, that these sky people might have conned early man into constructing guideposts to aid them in their sorties over this planet? The leys were worthless as roads. No, they weren't. But they did point out the flow of magnetic currents. Did the crafts of the sky people depend on these currents as a glider depends on air currents? Did we map out this entire planet to satisfy the needs of the mysterious aerial gods? Dr. Reich may have been on the right track. There may be forces surrounding us which were well known to the ancient peoples, which have been loosely defined in the mathematical art of astrology, and which are a vital part of the UFO mystery. What will happen when we at last learn the answers to these riddles? Will we begin working on lays of our own, or having unlocked the secrets of the universe, will we simply disappear as suddenly and mysteriously as the learned ancients did? Yeah, will we lay train tracks? Will we? Shut up, John. Will we make straight roads across the United States, the internet or the interstate system? Will we do that? Shut up, John. We already did do that. Have deodorant in our souls? Maybe someone can help me understand why someone would ask me if I'm going to do a pre-recorded video soon. You just want me to stop being live? You just want to piss me off? Thank you, Eric. I saw it, buddy. I should have eaten more of my dinner, but the 5-layer burrito at Taco Bell is gross. So in the meantime, I'm going to eat a dinner of these popcorners. Heard that, Eric. Yeah, Gina ran away. Someday, I'll field follow-up questions to what we just engaged in. Jayla? Hey, CMD, are they new from your perspective? I don't even remember when I did that. Alright, it is what it is, CMD. They're called popcorners. The label is literally on the screen when you ask that. The answer is literally on the fucking screen. Why do you fucking people share this shit with me? Fuck my fucking life. Oh, I was doing the Spoopyween reading. Now I'm questioning why I do anything. Ooh. It's been an hour. Maybe. I like the burned ones. Oh, good. Ooh, there's another one. It is indeed peaceful. Ooh, I like those. Hey, welcome back, Vienna. What the fuck? It rained all day today. Heard that, Gina? Heard that, Gina? Love you too, Eric. That's good as hell. You like that chapter, Eric? Before toilet paper, you're dumb. Everybody knows toilet paper was first. Yeah, I got a snack for Luke right here, actually. Share my walnuts with him. I read a couple of chapters from Disneyland of the Gods by John Keel. I was about to say, did I ban the word rich or something? Why is everybody misspelling rich with a T today? Maybe, Gina. Heard that. I don't know what it means, but I've read it. hate you people.